Hi, welcome to a demo movie of go4direct. We all remember and used in the past the web URLs where you had the ability to create a URL, a direct URL, and enable it for thumbnail, preview, or asset. And from those URLs, we could then get access to the file, the asset, the preview, or a thumbnail version. This, however, with sites being end of life, is going to disappear, and it can be replaced by zip, but not everybody has zip available. So I worked on an alternative, and the alternative can be go4direct. You can use the exact same URLs that you were used to use before, and more. Let me give you a few examples. There is a configuration file behind the scenes in which you configure the Cumulus server, the Cumulus administrator, and many more things, but let's just go for a simple example. I'm picking up a URL, and this URL will give me the thumbnail of record 139, record with ID 139 in the sample catalog. If I go to 14940, it gives me this thumbnail. So with a simple URL, you get access to your assets or converted versions of your assets, or the thumbnail, or even the metadata. So if I use, for instance, B on this one, then you see it takes a few seconds. Why does it take a few seconds? Well, this request was the very first time that this request was done. So it was creating it on the fly. It not only picked up the image, converted it to a JPEG, but it also added a watermark. So if now I go to the next record, I see this one goes much faster. Why? Because the tool also has cache. So you can configure, depending on the type of request, that it is allowed to use a cached version, which can be super fast. I can show many more images, but let's have a closer look at how you can configure this. As I said, it is a simple product that you add to your web apps, and it will connect behind the scenes to Cumulus. It needs the Cumulus administrator to do so, and it needs these two ports to be open to be able to talk to the Cumulus server. It has a license which can be acquired here, and then you can define how frequent the parameter file needs to be read. And so if this installation is under construction, then you can set this refresh to a low number like this 2, and then it doesn't reread this parameter file all the time. However, once this is installed and doesn't require a lot of changes, you can put up a very high number, which means that the parameter file will only be read every 100,000 or even 1 million after 1 million requests, or of course after a restart of Tomcat. You can also define if it should have logging, so you can say no logging, you can do normal logging, and you can do extended debug logging. You can also specify where you want to store the logs. It can be wherever you like. You can use a placeholder to use the Tomcat home folder, and also you can use placeholders like date now to get a date formatted in a certain way. And then you can configure up to 30 different configurations allowing access to Cumulus data. So the first ones are very extensively documented, but further down you can see that it is just a set of a couple of parameters to configure. You define the name, and the name is mapped directly to a part of the URL, and that mapping is done in the web.xml, so very similar to the existing TPA. What is important is that you can configure go4direct that it works automatically with any of your previously used sites, your direct URLs. So nothing has to change. It's just your backend that you're changing. You're just implementing go4direct instead of the site's direct URLs. You can define a catalog hard-coded or by using a placeholder. The placeholder, like it is referenced here, means that it takes the third element, the third folder defined in your URL. So in this case, the sample catalog. So in this example, this URL can access dynamically to each catalog you want to be accessible. And here is an example where you hard-code the name of the catalog. So let's get back here. Second thing is, of course, you need to find the record. The record can either be a simple search on the ID. Again, it can pick up a part of the URL, in this case the fourth part, 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, and so ID equals 133 in this example. Or it can use parameters, so a URL can have request parameters. So in this example you see that there's a request parameter called ID. So if you say ID equals 136, it will by specifying it like this pick up the parameter called ID. So it has a very flexible way of providing the record you want. It doesn't have to be the ID. It can be whatever Cumulus field that is searchable and that you provide in the URL. It can also be extended with additional queries. So similar to in the past where you could limit the access to assets only if a certain field had a certain value, like the thumbnail URL value enabled had to be true in the past for sites direct URLs to be able to access the thumbnail. If you try to access a record which didn't have it, you would get a default image. That again is exactly the same as in the past, but now your query can be whatever you need it to be. Additionally, then you have a type. What are you requesting? Well, there are several options. You can say, I want to do a Cumulus action, in which case you need to specify the Cumulus action name. And in that case, it will perform the action and return whatever file was created. Again, it can be whatever you like, whatever result of a Cumulus action. And for each of the configurations, you can define a different default. The default is returned in case the conversion fails, the query doesn't return a record. So anything that is here failing will return the default. And then you can define for each type, you can define the cache folder. The file is cached to a local folder on the web server, and you can define where. You can also define under which name it is configured, and you can use again placeholders for this. For instance, URI name is actually the folder path which is translated into a name by replacing the slashes by underscores. There is, I think, here in this example. So here, if you have a URL that looks like this, direct t sample catalog 123, it will return this as a file name. Why is it important not to pick up the real file name from Cumulus? Because if you want to use the cache, you don't first want to have to search in Cumulus to know what the name is, to know what name to look for. So you can do that, I'll show you, but it's not mandatory. If you want super fast results, always first looking in the cache, well, then it's smarter to do it this way. If you're not using URLs to get to the records, but you're using parameters, like in this example, ID equals 123, sample catalog, blah, 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 you can say, you can use this placeholder and then it will change it into this, where catalog name, sample catalog, ID minus 123. And so it translates the parameter part in that case to give you a unique name that it can use in the cache. And then we come to the cache life cycle. The cache life cycle, here you specify either that you don't want any cache. If you put it to 0, you don't want any cache for this type of URL. Or you can define a number of days. You can say, I want this to be valid for X amount of days. So only if the cache file is older than, for instance, 5 days, then I will create a new one. Then I will request from Cumulus a new one. Or an even smarter way of setting it to -1. It means that for each request, it will check the Cumulus record for the asset modification date. If the asset modification date is more recent than the cache file, it will automatically create a new file. This is, however, a little bit slower because it always has to do the connection to the search into the Cumulus catalog. And so if you want super fast results, you can work with this kind of parameters, a number of days. If you want to be sure always get the latest version but still have cache, then you should put it to this parameter. So let's look at some more examples. So if I use this URL, I'm going to use the thumbnail here. So in this case, this is the type that is called here image field, not action, but image field. And then either you specify the UID of the field, which could be the UID of a field that was automatically an image field that was automatically created by, example given, RoboFlow. But you could also just specify the word thumbnail, which means that it will use the thumbnail field. You can also use the UID of the thumbnail field. And you can also optionally add a size. So you can say, I want always to be returning this size. Or this size, again, could be picked up from the URL. It could be a part of the URL. It could be a parameter, a request parameter in the URL. And so that too is possible. So if I use that URL, here it goes. And there it is. You saw it took a couple of seconds. Why? Because it was the first time we requested it. As soon as it isn't requesting it, as soon as it's cached, it will be much faster. You see, this is instant. Going back, following example, preview. So P could reference to preview, but you could call it preview. You could call it whatever you like, and there's no way. There's no mandatory syntax. It's not hard-coded P or hard for preview. It's just an example of how it could pick up the original. Now you see, again, this took a couple of seconds because it required a conversion. If I do it again, it's super fast because it's cached. And so in any step, you can do this easily with cache or without cache. We already saw this example, and so with a watermark, you can add whatever action, and it's not the plugin that adds the watermark here. It's simply the URL that you call. You see the Cumulus action that you call. You see super fast. Why? It was cached. So the ones that are set. You can even use an image type called cache, and the URL type cache means that it doesn't look for anything in Cumulus, it just looks for a stored file in your cache, and you define how it should combine or find the name, you define where it should be. So an external tool could have prepared files for you, and you could have them and you can use them. And so here's left, and I know there's also a right down there, and you see left, right, and so very easy, not getting it from Cumulus, not looking in Cumulus. This is just direct from the cache. Action we already saw. An important notice is you can also get the original. Now the original is not something hard-coded, getting the original. It's just an action that returns you whatever you want it to return, and in this case I'm specifying the Cumulus action called copy original asset. In that case, the returning result can be whatever file extension that file was. And that's why in the cache file you can always use a star. The disadvantage of this is, the advantage of it is that it picks up the file extension from the original asset, but the disadvantage is that you cannot use cache if you use this technology, because it would first have to look into Cumulus to know what the name is, to know if it was cached, etc. So cache is not available if you're using the original. In case of the original, it actually assumes cache is 0. So the cache life cycle. But it's an example that you can use the placeholder star both for the extension, or if you put it in front of the dot, it's for the file name itself. It picks up the part in front. The last example is meta. You can use, if you look here, meta, and I think I have to restart my Tomcat because this was added afterwards. You can pick up metadata from a URL. And so you can just specify metadata, and let's see here, the URL has to be meta. And I'm just giving meta as an example to show you that the reference doesn't need to be a hard-coded one character. It can be multiple characters. So here. And there you go. And it returns the file. And if we say save as, here comes the file. And if we now take a look at that file, if I say I open it with Ultra Edit, I can see that it returns the image name, the ID, the folder in which it was stored. There was no notes, but there could have been notes. Why did it return this? Well, in the configuration, there was here a definition of in the type of parameter, there was a template defined, and this is this template. This template just has placeholders field with the UID of the field. This part is this last part is just text, doesn't matter, but this part defines which field to pick up, and that's how it picks up this field. So whenever you do the URL, it automatically picks up this field. This too does not use cache, and so there is no caching on this type here. So you can see all the metadata that is being brought available. So you can have as many fields in there as you like. So that's fully something you can freely configure. So this was go4direct, and as I said, there is always a fallback value, and so if I request something that doesn't exist, it can also give me background information on on what went wrong, or it can return a default value if you wanted to return a default value like we defined here. So, as I said, go4direct replaces sites. It uses a Cumulus user license 1 for all connections, and that way the tool can very easily serve files to an external system. If you are interested, you can contact me at peter@go4flow.be. Thank you for joining this training movie. See you in the next one.